The Nexus station hung in the void like a broken crown, its once gleaming spires now twisted metal and shattered glass. Where 10,000 souls had once lived and worked in the beating heart of the Xerian Empire, only silence remained. The great observation deck that had overlooked the spiral arms of the Andromeda sector now gaped open to space, its atmosphere long since bled away into the cosmic dark. Admiral Kira Voss pressed her palm against the reinforced viewport of her stealth cruiser, the Retribution, watching the derelict station rotate slowly in its death spiral. 3 years had passed since the betrayal, 3 years since Supreme Chancellor Thane Korath had sold out everything the Empire stood for to the hegemony of suns. 3 years since the greatest civilization in known space had crumbled in a matter of days. "Still hurts to look at, doesn't it?" The voice belonged to Commander Marcus Chin, her second in command and one of the few officers who had remained loyal when the Empire fractured. His reflection appeared ghost-like in the viewport beside hers, scarred face, graying temples, eyes that had seen too much betrayal to ever fully trust again. "Every time," Kira replied without turning. "But it reminds us why we're here." Behind them, the bridge of the Retribution hummed with quiet efficiency. Unlike the grand, ceremonial bridges of the old Imperial Navy, this was a warship built for shadows and secrets. Every surface was matte black, every display dimmed to preserve night vision. The crew moved with the practiced silence of ghosts, speaking in whispers when they spoke at all. They were the Loyalists, the last remnant of what the Xerian Empire had once been. 300 ships, maybe 400 if you counted the converted civilian vessels. 80,000 souls scattered across a dozen hidden bases in the deep reach, united by one burning purpose: to see Thane Korath pay for what he had done. "Sensor sweep complete, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Zara Okafor from the tactical station. "No hegemony patrols in this sector. The station appears to be completely abandoned." Kira nodded. The hegemony had stripped the station of anything valuable years ago, leaving it as a monument to their conquest. It was a calculated insult. They could have destroyed it entirely, but they chose to let it drift as a reminder of the Empire's fall. "Take us in closer," Kira ordered. "But keep the jump drive spun up. If we detect even a whisper of hegemony presence, we ghost out immediately." The Retribution glided through the debris field that surrounded the station like a steel shark swimming through a graveyard. Kira's eyes tracked the floating remnants of her former life, chunks of hull plating bearing the golden phoenix of the Empire, pieces of fighter craft that had belonged to squadrons she'd once commanded, personal belongings that had been ejected into space when the station's hull was breached. "Signal coming in on the old Loyalist frequency," Communications Officer Torres announced quietly. "It's encoded with yesterday's cipher." Kira's pulse quickened. Only a handful of people knew that cipher, and fewer still would risk using it in a dead zone like this. "Put it through." The holographic projector at the center of the bridge flickered to life, resolving into the image of a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in command. General Sarah Blackwood, former head of Imperial Intelligence, and the closest thing the Loyalists had to a Supreme Commander. "Admiral Voss," Blackwood's voice crackled with static from the long-range transmission. "I hope you're ready to come home. We've found him." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of the life support systems. Every eye turned to Kira, waiting for her response. She had spent 3 years hunting for this moment, 3 years preparing for the chance to make Korath pay for his betrayal. "Where?" she asked simply. "Kepler 442b, in the Tau Ceti system. He's established himself as the planetary governor under hegemony protection. Our sources indicate he'll be attending a diplomatic summit in the capital city of New Geneva in 2 weeks. It's our best chance, maybe our only chance." Kira closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Kepler 442b was deep in hegemony space, heavily defended and crawling with enemy forces. It would be a suicide mission for most of her fleet, and even if they succeeded, the retaliation would be swift and merciless. But it was Thane Korath, the man who had opened the gates for the enemy, the man who had handed over the Empire's military codes and defense positions. The man who had personally ordered the destruction of the Nexus station to cover his tracks, murdering thousands of civilians in the process. "Send me the full briefing," Kira said finally, "and signal the fleet. It's time to go home." 3 years earlier, Supreme Chancellor Thane Korath stood at the apex of the Imperial Senate chamber, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the assembled representatives of 200 worlds. The chamber itself was a testament to the Empire's glory, a vast sphere of crystalline walls that showed real-time feeds from across Xerian space, connected by walkways and platforms that seemed to float unsupported in the air. "My fellow citizens," he began, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the chamber through bioacoustic amplifiers. "For 800 years, the Xerian Empire has stood as a beacon of peace and prosperity in this galaxy. We have brought order to chaos, knowledge to ignorance, and hope to the hopeless." The senators applauded, as they always did. Korath had that effect on people, tall and commanding, with silver hair and the kind of presence that filled the room. He was everything a Supreme Chancellor should be: brilliant, charismatic, and utterly dedicated to the Empire's welfare. At least, that's what everyone believed. "But today," Korath continued, "we face a threat unlike any in our history. The hegemony of suns has massed a fleet of 10,000 ships at our borders. Their demands are simple: complete surrender or total annihilation." A murmur ran through the chamber. The hegemony had been growing more aggressive for months, testing the Empire's defenses and making increasingly bold incursions into Xerian space. But this was the first time anyone had spoken of outright invasion. Senator Maria Santos of the Core Worlds rose from her seat. "Supreme Chancellor, surely our fleet can handle this threat. The Imperial Navy has never known defeat." "Indeed, Senator Santos. Our military leaders assure me that we can repel any invasion. Admiral Voss estimates that we would destroy perhaps 7,000 of their ships before they reach the Core Worlds. Of course, they would still have 3,000 vessels remaining, more than enough to reduce every inhabited planet in the Empire to ash." The chamber fell silent. Korath let the weight of his words settle before continuing. "But there is another way. The hegemony has made an offer, not surrender, but absorption. Our worlds would retain their autonomy under hegemony oversight. Our people would be protected. Our culture would be preserved." "And our freedom?" demanded Senator David Park from the Outer Rim territories. Korath's expression hardened. "Freedom is meaningless to the dead, Senator Park. I have seen the intelligence reports from the hegemony's other conquests. They do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. When they say surrender or die, they mean exactly that." What the senators didn't know, what no one knew except Korath himself, was that the intelligence reports were fabricated. The hegemony had indeed made contact, but their offer was far more reasonable than he was letting on. They wanted the Empire's technology and strategic positions, but they were willing to let the government stand as long as they had access to both. The problem was that Korath wanted more than just survival. He wanted to be on the winning side when the dust settled, and his private negotiations with hegemony leadership had made it clear that cooperation would be rewarded with power in the new order. "I call for an emergency vote," Korath announced. "All in favor of opening negotiations with the hegemony of suns?" The vote was closer than he had hoped, but it passed. Korath tried to look relieved rather than satisfied as the chamber erupted in debate. Step 1 was complete. In the months that followed, Korath played his role perfectly. He appeared reluctant in public while conducting secret negotiations that would ensure his position in the new order. He fed the hegemony information about Imperial defenses while publicly calling for stronger resistance. He even authorized several defensive operations that were designed to fail, weakening the Empire's position while making himself look like a patriot. The final step came when Admiral Voss discovered evidence of a security breach in the military command structure. She was closing in on the truth, and Korath knew he was running out of time. So he activated the plan he had been preparing for months. "Admiral Voss," he said during their final meeting in the Chancellor's private office, "I'm afraid I have some disturbing news." Our investigation has revealed the source of the intelligence leaks. Kira leaned forward in her chair, her expression intense. Who is it, Chancellor? General Blackwood. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Sarah Blackwood had been Kira's mentor, the woman who had recruited her into the Imperial Navy and guided her rise through the ranks. The idea that she could be a traitor was almost incomprehensible. Sir, with respect, I find that extremely difficult to believe. I understand your skepticism, Admiral. But the evidence is overwhelming. Korath activated his desk display, showing what appeared to be encrypted communications between Blackwood and known hegemony agents. She's been feeding them information for months. The communications were sophisticated forgeries, created by Korath's private intelligence network. But they were convincing enough to fool even a seasoned officer like Voss. What do you want me to do? Kira asked, her voice hollow. Arrest her. Tonight. And Admiral, this conversation never happened. For the good of the Empire, the public can never know how deep this betrayal goes. Kira nodded slowly and stood to leave. As she reached the door, Korath called out to her. Admiral? I'm truly sorry it came to this. I know how much General Blackwood meant to you. If only she had known that within 24 hours, Korath would signal the hegemony fleet to begin their final assault. That he would personally transmit the Empire's defense codes to ensure minimal resistance. That he would order the destruction of the Nexus Station to eliminate the evidence of his treachery. That night, as Admiral Voss led a security team to arrest the woman who had been like a mother to her, Thane Korath sent a final message to his hegemony contacts. The Empire is yours. I trust you'll remember our agreement. Present day. The hidden base on Erebus 7 looked like nothing more than a mining operation from orbit. Ancient extraction equipment dotted the surface of the asteroid, while automated cargo haulers moved between the shipping bays in patterns that suggested legitimate commerce. It was a perfect disguise, the kind of operation that would be beneath the notice of hegemony patrol fleets. Below the surface, however, was one of the most sophisticated military installations in the galaxy. Admiral Kira Voss materialized on the transport pad in a flash of blue light, the quantum displacement field leaving her slightly disoriented as her molecules reassembled. Teleportation technology was still relatively new, and she had never gotten used to the sensation of being temporarily dispersed across the quantum foam. Welcome home, Admiral, said Captain Jessica Reeves, the base commander. General Blackwood is waiting for you in the war room. Kira nodded and followed Reeves through the corridors carved from living rock. The base bustled with activity. Technicians maintaining starfighters, intelligence analysts poring over stolen hegemony transmissions, and medical personnel treating wounded refugees from the Empire's former territories. It was a shadow of what the Imperial Navy had once been, but it was alive with purpose. The war room was located at the heart of the base, its walls lined with tactical displays showing the positions of Loyalist forces scattered across the galaxy. At the center of the room stood a holographic projector displaying a three-dimensional map of the Tau Ceti system, with Kepler 442b highlighted in pulsing red. General Sarah Blackwood turned as Kira entered, and the two women regarded each other for a moment in silence. 3 years had changed them both. Blackwood's hair had gone completely gray, and new lines creased her face. Kira's eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before the fall. Sarah, Kira said simply. Kira. It's good to see you. The awkwardness between them was palpable. They had been close once, closer than most family members. But the revelation of Koratha's betrayal had cast a shadow over everything that came before. Kira had arrested Blackwood on false charges, and while the truth had eventually come out, the damage to their relationship remained. You said you found him? Kira said, focusing on business rather than their personal issues. Blackwood nodded and gestured to the holographic display. Kepler 442b, as I said. He's been there for 18 months now, serving as planetary governor under hegemony oversight. Our intelligence suggests he's grown quite comfortable in his new role. What kind of defenses are we looking at? Significant. Blackwood manipulated the display, zooming in on the planet's orbital infrastructure. 3 heavy battle stations, each one roughly equivalent to an Imperial dreadnought. A standing patrol of 50 ships, mostly cruiser class with fighter support. Ground-based planetary defense batteries covering all major population centers. Kira studied the display grimly. It would take the entire Loyalist fleet to crack those defenses, and even then their chances of success were minimal. What about intelligence assets on the ground? That's where things get interesting. Blackwood smiled for the first time since Kira had arrived. Remember Dr. Elena Vasquez? She was head of the cultural exchange program before the fall. I remember. Disappeared during the evacuation of the core worlds. She didn't disappear. She went underground, established an identity as an anthropologist studying colonial societies. She's been on Kepler 442b for 6 months, documenting the cultural integration process for the Hegemony Academic Council. And she's been very busy. The display shifted to show a detailed schematic of New Geneva, the planet's capital city. Red dots marked the locations of key government buildings, military installations, and communication hubs. Vasquez has identified 17 high-value targets in the city, including the governor's mansion where Korath will be staying during the summit. More importantly, she's managed to recruit a network of local dissidents, people who remember what life was like under Imperial rule and aren't happy with their new masters. Kira felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. How many people are we talking about? About 300 active members, with perhaps twice that number providing passive support. They can't stand up to the hegemony military in open combat, but they can provide intelligence, sabotage key installations, and create enough chaos to cover our real objective. Which is? Blackwood's expression hardened. We're not just going to kill Korath, Kira. We're going to capture him. Bring him back alive to stand trial for his crimes. Let the galaxy see what happens to traitors. The room fell silent as the implications of that decision sank in. A straight assassination would be difficult enough, but a capture mission would be exponentially more complex. They would need to infiltrate the most heavily defended planet in the sector, grab a high-value target under the nose of the hegemony military, and escape with him intact. It's impossible, said Commander Chin, who had been listening quietly from the back of the room. Probably, Blackwood agreed. But sometimes impossible is the only option left. Kira turned away from the display and walked to the window that looked out over the base's main hangar. Below, technicians were working on a sleek black frigate that bore the scars of recent combat. The ship had been built for stealth and speed rather than heavy fighting, the kind of vessel that could slip past enemy patrols and disappear into the void. How many ships can you give me? She asked without turning around. For this? Everything we have. 400 ships, including the converted civilian vessels. It will leave our other bases defenseless, but if we can pull this off, it won't matter. Kira turned back to face the group. Because once we have Korath, once we can prove to the galaxy what he did, people will remember what the Empire stood for. They'll remember that surrender isn't the only option. She looked around the room at the faces of her fellow officers, men and women who had sacrificed everything for a chance at justice. They were veterans of a dozen battles, survivors of the Empire's fall, and the only family she had left. All right, she said. Let's bring the bastard home. Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted her field recorder and stepped back to frame the shot properly. Through the viewfinder, she could see the construction workers putting the finishing touches on the new monument in Central Plaza, a towering spire of black metal that reached toward the sky like an accusatory finger. The inscription at its base read, "In honor of the peaceful integration of Kepler 442b into the hegemony of suns. Day 127 of my cultural documentation project," she said into the recorder, maintaining the academic tone she had perfected over months of practice. The hegemony continues to invest heavily in symbolic architecture as part of their integration strategy. Local response appears mixed. What she didn't mention in her official report was that the monument had been built on the site of the old Imperial Embassy, and that construction crews had been required to work around the clock despite protests from local residents. Or that the mixed response, included 2 separate incidents of vandalism that had been quickly covered up by hegemony security forces. Elena had been a professor of xenoanthropology at the Imperial University before the fall, specializing in the study of human colonial societies. It was a background that made her perfect for this assignment. She could blend in as a legitimate researcher while gathering intelligence on hegemony operations and building a network of local contacts. The work had been dangerous from the beginning. The hegemony was suspicious of anyone with imperial connections, and Elena had needed to construct an entirely new identity to avoid detection. According to her forged credentials, Dr. Elena Martinez was a citizen of the independent world of Nexus Prime who had spent her career studying colonial integration patterns. Her previous work had been published in obscure academic journals that the hegemony was unlikely to check, and her cover story was boring enough to discourage casual interest. But the real challenge had been making contact with the local resistance without exposing herself as an agent. The people of Kepler 442b had good reason to be paranoid. The hegemony's secret police had a reputation for using infiltrators and provocateurs to root out dissidents. Anyone who showed too much interest in organized resistance was likely to disappear in the middle of the night. Elena had solved the problem by letting the resistance find her. It had started with small acts of defiance. She would ask pointed questions during her interviews with colonial officials, challenging the official narrative about the benefits of hegemony rule. She would visit historical sites associated with the old imperial government and take detailed notes about their current condition. She would engage local residents in conversations about the changes they had experienced since the integration. Slowly, carefully, she had established herself as someone who was sympathetic to the local population while remaining above suspicion. And eventually, the right people had noticed. The first contact came through Maria Santos, the former imperial senator who had somehow managed to avoid arrest during the purges. Santos was now working as a clerk in the colonial administration, keeping her head down and trying to blend in with the bureaucratic machinery. But she remembered what the empire had been like, and she was quietly gathering information about hegemony operations. "Dr. Martinez," Santos had said during their first clandestine meeting, "I understand you're interested in the social dynamics of colonial integration." "That's correct. I'm particularly interested in how local populations adapt to new governmental structures, and how they resist them." It was a test, and they both knew it. Elena's answer would determine whether she was a legitimate researcher or something more dangerous. "Resistance is a natural part of any integration process," Elena had replied carefully. "Most populations require time to adjust to new social paradigms. Some never adjust at all." Santos had smiled. "Perhaps you'd be interested in meeting some people who have been slow to adjust." That meeting had led to others, and those had led to the network that now spread throughout New Geneva like an underground river. 300 active members, as General Blackwood had said, but Elena knew the real number was higher. For every person willing to take direct action, there were 5 more who would provide information, safe houses, or other forms of passive support. The network's leader was a woman named Commander Lisa Park, the daughter of the former senator who had questioned Koratha's surrender proposal in the Imperial Senate. Lisa had been a junior officer in the Imperial Navy when the Empire fell, and she had managed to avoid capture by the simple expedient of being on leave when the hegemony forces arrived. She had spent the last 3 years building a resistance movement from scratch, using contacts from her military service and her family's political connections. "The summit is our best chance," Lisa said during their latest meeting in the back room of a coffee shop near the University District. "Korath will be here for 3 days, attending meetings and ceremonies. His security will be tight, but it won't be impenetrable." Elena nodded, reviewing the intelligence she had gathered over the past month. "He's staying in the governor's mansion, which is heavily fortified. But he'll need to travel to the summit meetings at the convention center, and that route takes him through several areas where we could potentially intercept him. What kind of support can we expect from off-world?" "Significant. Admiral Voss is bringing the entire Loyalist fleet, and they're prepared to take heavy casualties to complete the mission. But they'll need us to create enough chaos to cover their approach and extraction." Lisa leaned back in her chair, studying the tactical displays Elena had prepared. The hegemony has about 50 ships in the system, plus the orbital defense stations. Even if the Loyalists bring everything they have, it's going to be a close fight. That's why timing is crucial. We need to hit the planetary defenses at exactly the same moment the fleet arrives. If we can disable even half of the ground-based batteries, it will give our people a fighting chance. Elena's hands tightened around her coffee cup as she thought about what they were planning. It was audacious to the point of insanity. A handful of resistance fighters and a ragtag fleet of exile ships attempting to penetrate one of the most heavily defended systems in hegemony space. The odds against success were astronomical. But the alternative was letting Thane Korath live out his days in comfort, while the empire he had betrayed remained nothing but a memory. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "Something I haven't told General Blackwood yet." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Korath isn't just attending the summit as a hegemony governor. He's being considered for promotion to the hegemony High Council. If he gets that position, he'll be untouchable. This really is our last chance." The weight of that revelation settled over the small room like a shroud. The High Council was the supreme governing body of the hegemony, with members who were protected by layers of security that made planetary governors look vulnerable by comparison. "How long do we have?" Lisa asked. "The promotion will be announced at the end of the summit." 3 days. Lisa stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had once been the proud capital of a thriving imperial world. Now it was just another colonial outpost, its people reduced to subjects in someone else's empire. "Then we'd better get to work," she said. The assault fleet gathered in the shadow of the Oort cloud at the edge of the Tau Ceti system, 400 ships holding position in the frozen darkness between stars. They had traveled here through 7 different hyperspace routes, arriving over the course of 3 weeks to avoid detection by hegemony monitoring stations. Now they waited in the cosmic wilderness, running silent, while final preparations were made. Admiral Kira Voss stood on the bridge of her flagship, the heavy cruiser Defiance, watching the tactical display that showed the positions of her scattered fleet. They were arranged in 3 combat groups: the main assault force that would engage the orbital defenses, a rapid strike group designed to penetrate planetary airspace and extract Korath, and a reserve formation that would cover their withdrawal. It was the largest Loyalist operation since the fall of the Empire, and possibly their last chance to strike a meaningful blow against the hegemony. Every ship they had, every trained pilot, every piece of advanced technology they had managed to salvage from the wreckage of Imperial civilization. "Signal coming in from the surface," reported Communications Officer Torres. "It's Dr. Vasquez." The holographic projector flickered to life, resolving into the image of a woman in her 40s with dark hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from months of living under deep cover. Elena Vasquez looked older than her file photos, but her voice was steady as she delivered her report. "Admiral Voss, we're in position. The Resistance has teams standing by at 17 target locations throughout the city. Ground-based defense batteries, communication nodes, and transportation hubs. We're ready to begin synchronized attacks on your signal." "What about Korath's location?" "Confirmed at the governor's mansion. He arrived yesterday for preliminary meetings, and our sources inside the colonial administration indicate he won't be leaving the compound until the summit opening ceremony tomorrow morning. That gives us a 12-hour window." Kira nodded. The timing was crucial. They needed to strike during the narrow window when Korath was present but before the full summit security apparatus was activated. Too early, and they would miss their target. Too late, and they would face additional security forces from the other attending delegations. "Any changes to the security arrangements?" "Negative. 3 companies of hegemony Marines, plus local security forces and Korath's personal guard detail. Standard defensive positions around the mansion perimeter. They're not expecting an assault from orbit." Because it was impossible, Kira thought. No sane military commander would attempt what they were about to do. The hegemony had grown complacent in their dominance, assuming that the broken remnants of the Imperial Navy would never dare to challenge them directly. They were about to learn otherwise. Dr. Vasquez, please convey my thanks to Commander Park and her people. Whatever happens in the next 24 hours, they've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. Elena's image nodded solemnly. Admiral, there's something else you should know. We've received intelligence that Karatha's promotion to the High Council will be announced at the summit's closing ceremony. If we don't get him now, we will. Kira's voice carried a certainty she didn't entirely feel. Signal ends in 60 seconds. Good luck, Doctor. And to you, Admiral. See you on the other side. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Around them, the fleet continued its patient vigil, hundreds of ships and thousands of crew members waiting for the order that would send them into battle against impossible odds. General Blackwood's voice came through on the fleet command channel. All ships, this is Blackwood. Final mission briefing in 30 minutes. Department heads to the command deck. Kira made her way through the ship's corridors to the main briefing room, where the senior officers of the assault fleet had gathered via holographic link. The faces that looked back at her represented the best of what remained of the Imperial Navy, veteran commanders who had fought in a dozen campaigns, tactical specialists who had studied every aspect of hegemony military doctrine, and engineers who had somehow managed to keep their aging ships operational through 3 years of exile. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackwood began. In 6 hours we will commence Operation Reckoning, the largest military action undertaken by Loyalist forces since the fall of the Empire. Our objective is simple: capture Supreme Chancellor Thane Korath and bring him to justice for his crimes. The tactical display shifted to show the Tau Ceti system in detail, with red markers indicating known hegemony positions and green markers showing the planned approach routes for each combat group. Phase 1 begins with a coordinated attack on the system's outer monitoring stations. Captain Rodriguez, your stealth frigates will eliminate the early warning network and clear a path for the main assault force. Captain Maria Rodriguez nodded from her position aboard the frigate Shadow's Edge. She was a specialist in electronic warfare and covert operations, with a reputation for getting impossible jobs done. Phase 2 is the main assault. Admiral Chen, your battle group will engage the orbital defense stations while Admiral Voss leads the strike group to the planet's surface. Your job is to keep the hegemony fleet busy while we complete the extraction. Commander Marcus Chen, now promoted to Admiral and commanding a formation of 12 heavy cruisers, acknowledged the order with a grim smile. His ships were the oldest in the fleet, converted exploration vessels and merchant haulers that had been retrofitted with military weapons. They wouldn't last long in a straight fight with the hegemony's frontline warships, but they might last long enough. Phase 3 is the extraction. Admiral Voss, your people will have exactly 30 minutes on the ground to locate and secure Korath. After that, the hegemony reinforcements will make extraction impossible. Understood, Kira replied. What about our escape route? Admiral Park's reserve formation will cover our withdrawal to the hyperspace jump point. If everything goes according to plan, we'll be clear of the system before the hegemony can organize an effective pursuit. If everything goes according to plan, Kira thought. In her experience, military operations rarely went according to plan, especially when they involved this many variables and unknowns. Questions? Blackwood asked. The silence stretched for several seconds before Captain Rodriguez spoke up. General, what are our rules of engagement regarding civilian casualties? It was a sobering question. The battle would be fought over a populated world with millions of innocent people who had no part in the conflict between the Empire and the hegemony. The wrong decision could turn their mission of justice into an act of terrorism. Minimum necessary force, Blackwood replied firmly. We target military installations and government facilities only. Any commander who authorizes attacks on civilian targets will face court-martial charges when we get home. Assuming any of them lived long enough to get home, Kira reflected. But the principle was important. They were fighting to restore the Empire's values, not to abandon them. If there are no other questions, you have your orders. All ships will begin final approach in 4 hours. Admiral Voss, Admiral Chen, Admiral Park, good hunting. The holographic conference dissolved, leaving Kira alone with her thoughts. In 4 hours, she would lead her ships into battle against the people who had destroyed everything she had ever served. Win or lose, nothing would ever be the same. She returned to the bridge and took her position in the command chair, watching as the final preparations were made throughout the fleet. Weapons systems came online, shields were charged to full power, and fighter squadrons performed their pre-flight checks. The Loyalist fleet was as ready as it would ever be. "Admiral," reported the sensor officer, "we're receiving a coded transmission from the surface. It's Dr. Vasquez again. Put her through." Elena's image appeared on the main screen, and this time she was clearly in a different location, what looked like a basement or underground facility. "Admiral, we've just received word that Karatha's schedule has changed. He's being moved to a secure bunker beneath the convention center as a precautionary measure. The hegemony may have detected something." Kira felt her stomach drop. The governor's mansion had been a difficult target, but the convention center bunker was supposed to be impregnable. Built into the bedrock beneath the city, it was designed to protect government officials from everything up to and including orbital bombardment. "Can your people get us access to the bunker?" "We're working on it. Commander Park has contacts in the facility's maintenance staff, but we'll need time to develop an infiltration plan." Time they didn't have. If the hegemony suspected something, they would be increasing security throughout the system. The window of opportunity was closing fast. "Doctor, how certain are you about this intelligence?" "Very certain. The source is someone inside the colonial administration who has been reliable in the past." Kira closed her eyes and weighed her options. They could proceed with the original plan and hope that Karath was moved back to the mansion before they arrived. They could abort the mission and try again another time, assuming another opportunity ever presented itself. Or they could adapt their plan to target the bunker, knowing that it would significantly increase the risk to her people. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. "Dr. Vasquez, tell Commander Park to proceed with the bunker infiltration plan. We're not turning back now." "Understood, Admiral. We'll be ready." The transmission ended, and Kira turned to address her bridge crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a change of plans. But our mission remains the same. In 4 hours, we're going to show the galaxy that the Xerian Empire is not dead. Are you with me?" The response was immediate and unanimous. "Yes, ma'am." Outside the viewport, the first ships of the assault fleet were already beginning their approach to the inner system, running dark and silent through the cosmic night. Behind them came the main force, hundreds of vessels carrying the last hope of a fallen empire toward their date with destiny. Admiral Kiravaz settled back in her command chair and began the countdown to Operation Reckoning.